The topic is to explore LGBTQ plus issues. And I put a sub-theme exploring the acronym because LGBTQ plus is an acronym. And then what are the concepts and what are the terms, and trying to explore those all with the aim of leading to understanding. And the proposed title that was given to me, and which I think I've tried to stay with, understanding our position around LGBTQ issues. And I want to say that what I'm presenting to you now is very much from my own personal reflection, unlike the other webinars where I was presenting a position paper, which was the position of the congregation. This is more an issue where the congregation has not made any public stance in terms of saying this is our position. So this is my reflection on the issue, and looking at that then in terms of the position of the church will be contrasted against human rights positions and the interplay of these with Good Shepherd mission. This is what I'm attempting to address in this presentation. And I think it is given to us in terms of how to proceed when the girls from Sri Lanka had their wonderful theme song for the International Day of the Girl, and it was entitled Break the Silence. And the silence around LGBTQ issues and persons is a silence that needs to be broken. And I think that's what I am proposing this evening in terms of breaking that silence and hopefully giving us a platform whereby we're able to begin to talk with one another, understand the issues more deeply, and begin to explore how to be engaged with people who are of the LGBTQ community and who might be in our ministries, or members of our staff, or members of our community. And I think we got into this issue very much from the International Day of the Girl and our most wonderful panel event that we had on October 11, where we had Gillian Fernandez speak to us about her own experience in the LGBTQ plus community. And indeed, I think she is our champion and our advocate. And only this morning, and I was so delighted to get it, the webcast of the event has been broken down, and so we're able to have each of the panelists' presentations separate. So by clicking on this link, you will be able to get the presentation without having to work your way through 2 hours of video. So again, thank you very much, Gillian. You may be on this call. Thank you very much for what you contributed that way. And as I say, you are indeed our champion and our advocate. So Teresa already launched the poll, but I am going to also have a number of polls throughout this presentation. And my first question is, why are you hesitant or reluctant to speak of LGBTQI issues? So why? And I give a number of reasons why, and I ask you to select all that apply to you. It's not just one answer, all or some, whatever applies to you. So we will launch the poll now. So here it is, and your options are: it's immoral, I'm fearful, it's unlawful, it's unnatural, it's evil, it's not nice, it's offensive, or none of the above. So if none of those phrases speak to you, click none of the above. And some of you who are very knowledgeable, as we saw in the first poll, might want to remember back to when you became knowledgeable, and can you link into what your feelings were then, and what would you click? Like, what was your feelings at that time as you tried to gain knowledge? I know for myself personally, in my journey with regard to encountering and meeting and having friends among the LGBTQ plus community, would have been many of the points I have raised, from it being immoral, being fearful, feeling it wasn't nice, that there was something unnatural about it. So I kind of wrote these from my own reflections of myself and my own journey. So, you know, again, just glance through them, and we will end the poll in a few seconds. Already 91 of 99 people have voted. So I think that's okay. We can end the poll.
I'm sharing the results now, Winifred.
Please, Teresa.
Can you see? Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, yes. Thank you. So while 61% said none of the above are applicable, then we have a range of of figures with regard to the various categories. The one with least figure is that it's evil. But the others then, immoral, 6%, fearful. And I would have experienced that myself, I think, very strongly, fearful, unlawful, 4%, unnatural, 19%, the evil, 1%, not nice, 5%, and offensive, 10%. So thank you again for taking part in the poll, and we'll come back to this later on. Okay, stop sharing.
Just go ahead and click your slides.
Yes, I have it now, yes. Very good, okay. So the agenda that I'm proposing is really in 7 sections, and we begin with the definition of terms, and every day there's a new term, so the terms can be confusing, and this takes us from slide 7 to 16. Then we will look at legal aspects and human rights aspects, slides 18 to 29. Then we look at the impact of religious norms, customs, and practices. And here I think I center more in terms of religious norms, 31 to 35. Then moving to a pastoral understanding, slides 37 to 41, with recommendations and resources. And then we will have time for breakout groups. We'd hope that there'd be at least 15 minutes for discussion in groups. So slides 7 to 14, vocabulary. Learning a new vocabulary enables one to deepen one's understanding. Notice your reactions and responses to what you will be hearing. And notice that in the light of the poll that we have just had. So terms LGBTQ plus or LGBTQI, or LGBTQQIAA. So this is all of the vocabulary and acronyms that are around. The more common one is the LGBTQ. And the meaning there is gay, gay usually referring to men or women. But usually we talk about it and refer to gay men. Lesbian, referring to women. Then there's a category of bisexual. Another group that like transgender. Another group that don't really feel they can fit in any of those terms, and so they speak of themselves as questioning. And with regard to the other two T's, we have transsexual and two spirits. Sometimes these terms are used. And with the Q, the questioning or queer. And only very recently, I came across a theologian who is herself queer. And she prefers this term. And there's only one way that you can know what term people like is by asking the question. So this was one thing that I learned about asking people how they like to be referred to. And they see it as a sign of interest on our part and a sign of respect. But this theologian, this woman theologian, she liked to be referred to as queer. With regard to intersex, this is another, the I, intersex. Again, you have asexual and ally. Now, an ally is somebody who is not LGBTQ, or sometimes we talk about people who are straight. They're an ally, they're standing with the LGBTQ community. And then the plus, if you see LGBTQ plus, and for me, I have to say, I learned this one from Sanjana, who was on the panel during the Day of the Girl, and I asked her about the plus because I hadn't seen it. So the plus stands for anybody else that doesn't fit into some of these terms. So you would have people who would say, well, I'm agender, or bigender, or gender variant, or gender queer, or pangender. Some of these terms you may or may not be familiar with in terms of the plus, but I have given you the link there that you can look up these terms and explore them and see what they mean. LGBTQ is the more commonly used term, and you may hear of a queer community, or I think in more recent days and years we hear of the rainbow community, because the LGBTQ community adopt the flag of the rainbow colors. The acronyms and various terms are evolving. It's not something static. It's not something that we have all the language, we know everything, and this is it. No, it's evolving and developing. And from my perspective, I would call on us to be respectful and to use the terms people prefer. Now, being respectful is something that I have been challenged with in my own life in terms of my first encountering people who were members of the LGBTQ community, and wondering and being afraid and wondering how to talk to them and how different are they, and all of that kind of emotion was raised. So it's hard to be respectful if you're going through emotional turmoil yourself. So somewhere you need to sort out your own emotions, and you need to, in some senses, practice some of these terms. And if you have good friends that are members of the LGBTQ community, they're more than helpful in helping us to learn the terms, helping us to know what questions to ask, and above all, helping us to be respectful. Gay pride is another term that you may have heard of. Certainly I never heard of it until I came to the United States. But the rainbow colours and gay pride more or less go together, and they're terms that come from the USA, but now they're actually used globally, particularly the rainbow colours. And the gay pride has to do with people who are in the LGBTQ community and members of that community feeling a sense of pride in who they are. Early demonstrations, people who came out of the closet, and that was a term that was used in terms of people actually telling others that they were gay or lesbian or transgender or whatever, that they came out of the closet. Or sometimes we hear the term coming out. And they're proud of who they are themselves and of the diversity that exists. And pride events are not just confined to people who are themselves members of the LGBTQ community, but are also people who are straight, and that's meaning neither not lesbian or gay. So having this sense of pride is important to them, and it's part of their empowerment and their understanding of themselves. Now, looking at terms and continuing there, gender as a binary term. And that's certainly the way I understood it almost up until I came to the United States, and maybe for 4 or 5 years while I was here, as being either man or woman. And this has been ingrained, I use the word ingrained, in our minds. It's part of our upbringing, my upbringing, I better say my upbringing, my socialization. We were part of a gender binary system that causes some people to experience exclusion. So the coining of the term LGBTQ is forcing us to think along a continuum. And if you remember from other webinars, we used this continuum idea a few times. So based on people's own experience of themselves, and not in an either or way of thinking. So it's not just male or female, and that's it. Some people do not identify themselves exclusively as male or female. And it's those people that are members of the LGBTQ community. So in understanding this issue, we need to distinguish between sexuality and gender. So I have a number of terms here that I'm going to go down through, talking and looking at biological sex. This has to do with a person's external genitals, internal reproductive system that inform whether a person is female or male or intersex. And intersex is a term for people who are not easily identified as female or male, because sex characteristics are not easily recognizable at birth. So already in the moment of birth, when the baby actually appears for the first time, there are some babies, and it cannot be said easily whether they are a girl or a boy. For the majority, it's clear it's a boy or a girl, but for some it's not. So that's about the biological differences. But sexuality is about sexual feelings, thoughts, attractions, behaviors, and this towards other people. One can find other people physically, sexually, or emotionally attractive. And all of these things are parts of our sexuality. Sexual identity has to do with a sense of self as a sexual being. And this includes terms like gender identity, gender role, sexual orientation. Development of sexual identity is a critical part of adolescent development. And I think as we explore later in the webinar, we will see it's also part of the younger child's development as well. So sexual identity. And then sexual orientation. This has to do with who one is attracted to. And we have the term heterosexual, which is attracted to the other sex. And sometimes we use the word straight. And we have homosexual, which is somebody who is attracted to a person of the same sex. And we have bisexual, someone who can be attracted to both men and women. So the whole issue around sexuality is complex because it has to do with our physical anatomy, it has to do with our feelings, it has to do with my sense of myself and who I am attracted to and how I come to that sense of myself. And this has been the journey, I think, of people who belong to the LGBTQ community, trying to sort out and talk about and share with us who they are in themselves, in their experience, at the core of their being. Who are they? And that can be a difficult journey, certainly for them, but even for us who think, well, I'm a woman and that's clear, I'm a female, I'm a woman and I'm attracted to men. Or I'm a man and anything to do with homosexuality is abhorrent. So this is the journey for these people who have been so courageous as to embark on it and share with us. And up to 1.7% of babies born with sex characteristics that don't fit the typical definition of male or female. That makes being intersex as common as being red-headed. This is a graphic I got from Free and Equal, which is part of the UN effort in terms of looking at these issues. But up to 1.7% of babies born are born with sex characteristics that don't fit the typical definition of male or female. So now we're moving from looking at sexuality to looking at gender. And gender is an individual's personal, social, or legal status as female, male, or transgender. Gender is a cultural construct that reflects society's expectations for feminine and masculine qualities and behaviors. I think there immediately of the whole idea that women wear skirts and work in the home and look after the children. That's a social construct around what it is to be feminine. Whereas a man wears pants and goes out to work and is the breadwinner. Now we know in today's world that's upside down, and we're seeking what we call gender equality, equality between men and women. So that's gender. Then you have gender expression, outward expression of an individual's gender, often through behavior, clothing, hairstyle, voice, or bodily characteristics. Then the gender role, cultural expectations of female or male. Then you have gender non-conforming, a term for individuals whose gender expression is different from societal expectations related to gender. And then you have another term, transgender, an umbrella term for individuals whose gender identity or gender expressions differ from those associated with their assigned sex at birth. It does not provide information about the person's sexual orientation. And other terms that are used are heterosexism, similar to racism or sexism, and it refers to systemic privilege. Privileging, systemic privileging of heterosexuality. So those of us who are heterosexual, we have certain privileges. We experience these privileges because we're heterosexual. And if you're homosexual or lesbian, you don't experience them. So you are discriminated against, you are excluded, and you might be laughed at and made a subject of ridicule, etc. Then there's homophobia, which is fear of, or dislike, or hatred, or prejudice towards homosexual persons. And then there's transphobia, which is irrational fear, dislike, or prejudice towards transgender persons. I have already mentioned to you about queer, once a negative term for lesbian or gay men. Queer, queer has recently been reclaimed by some of the LGBTQ people as a self-affirming term, referring to anyone who is not heterosexual. Be careful in using this term without first asking the person. And then the group that are questioning, some people do not identify with any of the terms and are still in a process of understanding their own sexual orientation or gender identity. And they refer to themselves as questioning. Sometimes third gender, sometimes gender queer, or use no terms at all. So coming to grips with vocabulary is very important in, I think, learning and understanding people in this community. And with that, I want to launch another poll. It's time for you to take your breath after hearing all those terms. And I'm sure you feel confused and saying, what's the difference between one and the other? Well, that's something I think you can look at later on and go back on. And you find loads of information by using Google search bar. And you can read there and get any term and every term. So this poll is, what were your feelings, emotions, responses, reactions to what you heard? So I'm looking at feelings, emotions, responses, reactions. So we will launch the poll and you select all that applies to you. So did you feel disgust, fear, anxiety, uncomfortable, apprehensive, disapproval, contempt, or none of the above? So just take your time and just read down through them and see where and what feelings were coming up for you. Disgust, fear, anxiety, uncomfortable, apprehensive, disapproval, contempt, or none of the above. Thank you very much for responding to the poll. 85 of 104 people have answered. It's still going up. 91, 92. We'll give it another 20 seconds. Uh, 97 of 104 have answered. Very good. Thank you very much again. And we'll have the results of the poll now. So it's very interesting. There's a range of feelings emerging as you hear this. Disgust, 3%, fear, 3%, anxiety, 7%, uncomfortable, 14%, apprehensive, 12%, disapproval, 5%, contempt, 4%. And again, I want to thank you sincerely for answering, because I think this reflects fairly accurately what we experience when we start addressing this issue in depth, and particularly if we don't have a lot of knowledge. And even if we do have a lot of knowledge, sometimes we don't have time to process our own feelings. So we can have gained knowledge, but not actually looked at what's happening in ourselves. So thank you very much. We will end this poll and we will continue. Now we're going to look at the legal aspect. And you can find out, I put a link in there, you can go to that link in your own time and see what's there and read from it. But a sodomy law is a law that defines certain sexual acts as crimes. The precise sexual acts meant by the term sodomy are rarely spelt out in law, but are typically understood by courts to include any sexual act deemed to be unnatural or immoral. And sodomy typically includes anal sex and oral sex. Any kind of penetration that isn't actually sexual intercourse in terms of the penis into the vagina. So this is the law that you will find on statute books, a sodomy law. And in doing my research, I came across this map, and I thought it was very interesting. And it's talking about criminalization of same-sex relations. So the top map is 1790. And the red areas are areas where same-sex relations were criminalized. The gray areas were unknown. And the blue areas, which mostly had to do with Africa and down here, Madagascar, and there's some places over here in Asia, don't ask me what countries they are, you probably would be able to pick them out, in blue, where same-sex relations were decriminalized, meaning it wasn't a crime. And look what has happened by 2019. The red areas are criminalized. The blue areas are decriminalized, and the gray are still unknown. So isn't it an interesting kind of reversal, if you like, from criminalized to decriminalization? You can find this map on the Fair and Equal website, and you can go through the different years if you're interested in exploring. I just took the two maps, but you can pull the cursor along and it gives you how and when the different laws came about. And many of the laws used today to criminalize LGBT people are based on laws imposed by colonial powers in the 19th century. So just a little bit of history. And today, more than 70 countries still criminalize same-sex relationships. I think since this graphic was prepared, the number has gone down to 69. I saw 69 in some other documents I was reading. And countries that outlaw same-sex relations. Now you can see that your countries are very much in this category. Malaysia, Myanmar, Pakistan, Singapore, Sri Lanka. There may be others that I wasn't able to find out about. Malaysia outlaws same-sex relations, criminalizes forms of gender expression. Category of offense is that unnatural or indecent acts. Up to 20 years in prison, whipping and fines. And the whipping and the fines are, I think, related to states where the Sharia law is upheld. And gender expression, male person posing as a woman, as a female person posing as a man, the sentence there is up to 3 years in prison, fines and mandatory counseling. In Myanmar, criminalizes same-sex conduct, and the term they use is unnatural offense, and the sentence is up to 20 years in prison. Pakistan outlaws same-sex relations, category unnatural and indecent acts, and the sentence can be life in prison or 2 to 10 years and a fine. Singapore outlaws same-sex relations, the category unnatural, indecent acts, sentence 2 years in prison. Sri Lanka outlaws same-sex relations, category unnatural, indecent acts, and the sentence is up to 10 years in prison and a fine. And in 1994, Tonu versus Australia, the Human Rights Committee confirmed criminalizing homosexuality violates rights to privacy and non-discrimination in breach of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So I put that in just to highlight that it's in breach of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Now, the laws are constantly changing. In 2019, the Supreme Court in India struck down laws prohibiting same-sex conduct. Now, that's only last year. The fact that particular countries are not mentioned in these maps does not mean it is in compliance with international human rights law. Some prohibit so-called propaganda in support of LGBTQ rights in an effort to silence activists. And others have erected barriers to freedom of association and assembly for LGBT groups. So you can see even in the acronyms that are used, how many letters are there and how the language is evolving and developing all the time. So if there aren't laws, then there can be propaganda that silence people and silence activists from talking, or barriers erected to freedom of association, meaning that LGBTQ people cannot come together to discuss and talk and advocate, etc. And you're living in these climates. So I imagine that you, given the polls, I was trying to think of how one can be very restricted in one's thought and with regard to looking at one's feelings. If you feel you're breaking the law, if you feel it's unnatural, as is the term used in some of the law, in all of the laws, it's unnatural. Other points, countries that explicitly criminalize sex between women are Malaysia and Sri Lanka. And then countries that use vague language that could criminalize sex between women are Myanmar and Pakistan. So even when human rights people and lawyers look at the different laws, sometimes they're vague and it's not quite clear what's meant. But these are picking out criminalizing sex between women in these four countries. So the human rights aspect of it and the United Nations, the website is free and equal. And it was established in 2013. Now, I have to say, I wasn't aware of it until I undertook to look up this information for this webinar. So I have learned in doing it. So free and equal. It's advocating that we stand up for equal rights and fair treatment for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people everywhere. And they're basing it on Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. You're familiar with this from all of the other webinars. And the current UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, she says the struggle for the rights of the LGBTI people is a core part of the human rights struggle. So that's how she sees it. And Prince Zaid, who is my favorite in terms of the commissioners for human rights, he was before Michelle Bachelet, but what he said was far too few of us are aware of the specific human rights violations faced by millions of intersex people. Because their bodies don't comply with typical definitions of male and female, intersex children and adults are frequently subjected to forced sterilization and irreversible surgery and suffer discrimination in school, workplaces, and other settings. It would take a whole webinar in itself to explore all that's behind what Prince Zaid has said there. But particularly with what intersex children and adults have been forced to experience and undergo because they felt they were different. And I myself even heard people witness in the United Nations. I heard a woman in particular from Eastern Europe who wanted to have a sex change. And she had to agree to 6 months in psychiatric hospital with electric shock therapy over that 6 months to see would it make her change her mind. Now, that's what some of what Prince Zaid is referring to there, but he's also talking about sterilization and irreversible surgery that people have been forced to undergo. So the human rights, lesbians, gay, and bisexuals do not claim any special or additional rights, but the observance of the same rights as those of heterosexual persons. And that's in line with what I said about we who are heterosexual are privileged. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender persons are denied, either by law or practice, basic civil, political, social, and economic rights. The following violations have been documented in all parts of the world. Through those special criminal provisions or practices on the basis of sexual orientation in many countries, lesbian, gays, and bisexuals are denied equality in rights and before the law. So all of that can be said in simple language, and that is that people who are LGBTQ, members of the LGBTQ community, their human rights are infringed. And we have an independent expert on the protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity at the UN. This guy, Victor Madrigal Burlos. And I was very struck by what he has said. He said, every day, trans and gender diverse people around the world are victims of violence to levels that offend the human conscience. So having brought you through this part of the webinar, we have another poll. And the question here, are LGBTQ actions and behaviors moral or immoral? So we will launch the poll for you. And after I prepared the slide, I put in a third category, a mental health problem. So choose one. Are they moral, immoral, or a mental health problem? Again, thank you very much for participating in the poll. 78 of 110 people have already polled. There's a range of responses, moral, immoral, a mental health problem.
Winifred, perhaps as we are waiting for people to finish the poll, there is a question in the chat box directed to you.
Okay.
Question,
can you read the question for me, please?
I will read to you. I would like to know the situation in Africa. Is it still a taboo in that continent, especially in West Africa? In 2011, there was a furor when a gay person died. The body was exhumed because it was buried in a cemetery and transferred to the backyard of that person.
My memory doesn't recall the case, and I wouldn't be able to speak in terms of West Africa because I didn't live there. But in terms of East Africa, it is taboo, and it's shunned upon and not spoken about, and the laws would be against. Even Kenya, to this day, the laws would be to criminalize same-sex persons, and there's a certain tension at the moment trying to get it reversed, but the Kenyan government is still very strong in what they're holding to. I wouldn't be surprised in terms of a community reacting in this way, taking up a body, exhuming it and burying it outside of the cemetery if it became known. And that's why so often people lived in secret and were afraid ever to talk about how they were experiencing themselves. So that's all I can say to that. We will end.
Yeah,
we will end the poll. Yes. And the poll is 56% think it's moral. 18% think it's immoral, and 29% think it may be a mental health problem. Okay, again, I am deeply appreciative of the fact that you are engaging with the polls. I think this is the way we begin to understand where we are ourselves and where we are in relation to other people. So again, thank you very much for that. I hope you're not too tired listening to me. I'm going to continue. I kept the conversation to the end. I'm going to continue. We're over, well, almost an hour, but we're more or less after this section. You won't have to concentrate as much. And even in this section, I don't think you will have to concentrate that much either. But the next few slides are focused on religion. And I decided to focus more in terms of the Catholic tradition. I know that Islam is very against LGBTQ people. Well, the extremist groups are, but I've decided not to go there, that I'm better able to speak from the Catholic Church perspective. So for those of us who are not of the Catholic Church tradition, please bear with me. And please, you know, I have no idea where you would stand if you are a Buddhist or a Hindu or some of the other religions in Asia. So I want to just preface what I want to say with saying I'm looking at this particular perspective. But I think I can say that in the more enlightened groups, certainly in Islam, I think you will find something akin to what I am saying. So I am reflecting from what I've read from a priest here in America, Father James Martin. He's a Jesuit priest who is quite outspoken in terms of addressing discrimination against LGBTQ peoples, and also has met with the Holy Father, Pope Francis, on occasions, and the two of them, I think, might be of like minds. So that's, I'm prefacing what I'm going to say with much of what I'm saying is echoing Father James Martin. And the first distinction that he makes, and to me, I loved it when I heard it, and I hope it addresses people who felt that this is a moral issue. And that when you look at this and then where are you in ministry? So the first distinction he makes is that we are not addressing this topic from a moral standpoint, a moral binary, good or evil. That's the first thing statement he makes. And he says, we leave that up to the moral theologians to debate around the morality or immorality. We're not going there. He said, we are using a pastoral, professional human rights approach. And all of those words are in line with the previous webinars we've had and the position papers. Legal issues and the law usually present in a binary way. It's legal or it's illegal. We have seen within the laws of the countries that there is a movement towards legalizing LGBTQ actions and behaviors. So where does that leave us? The Catechism of the Catholic Church does not address bisexual or transgender persons, but rather just talks about homosexual persons. And something of that has to do with when the Catechism was last revised and where we were in our vocabulary. The Church does not teach that being simply gay or lesbian is a sin. They don't teach that. That's not part of the teaching at all. So who you are in your person, saying I'm a gay man, I'm a lesbian woman, I'm transgender, that's not a sin, and doesn't have any moral implications or overtones or undertones. What the church does teach is that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered and contrary to nature. And I think the very minute you hear contrary to nature, you think back to the laws that I outlined for you, where they said it was unnatural. And I've given you the catechism numbers there, anyone that's interested in looking it up. Consequently, the homosexual orientation, and that's the old language, and by extension, any other orientation other than heterosexual is regarded as objectively disordered. And I have that in inverted commas, and maybe that links in with the responses in terms of it being a mental health issue and saying there's something wrong with the person's mind. Now, all this reasoning comes from the natural law, which was influenced by the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas. So some of you sisters who are as old as I am might have studied some theology at some stage along the way and was introduced to Thomas Aquinas. Certainly I remember it of happy years. And he drew from the philosopher Aristotle. So Aquinas says that all is ordered towards something. An acorn is ordered towards becoming a tree. And a child is ordered towards becoming an adult. And sexuality is ordered towards procreation. So with the theology and the philosophy that we have engaged with and which has formed our minds, everything is ordered. So in that thinking, in natural law, homosexual acts are not ordered towards this specific end, which was procreation, and so they are deemed disordered. And so you get the word objectively disordered. Remember, these words used in the laws of the countries deemed LGBTQ acts to be unnatural or immoral. So that's some of the jargon and the thinking that is part of our history and part of our formation. And it's important to realize that when we speak about objective disorder, it does not refer to the person, but to the orientation. So the innate dignity of the person is maintained. The term is not used in psychology, but comes from philosophy and theology. And I suppose we have to realize how our understanding has developed and how the sciences have brought us forward. And we think of all the great work that has been done in terms of cosmology and the Big Bang. And all of this was unheard of. And here we are incorporating all of that science into our prayer life, our community life, relating with nature, whatever. Equally, in the whole area of psychology, our understanding of the human person has changed, but our catechism hasn't caught up to that. So the term objective disorder does not detract from the inherent dignity of any human being, since God creates all human beings equal and good. But the Catechism goes on to say the number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. I find that really enlightening to read because I wouldn't have thought I would have found it there. They do not choose their homosexual condition. These words are there, they do not choose. For most of them, it is a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard must be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross and the difficulties they may encounter from their condition. So it's from here, I think, we have to take our cue with regard to our ministry. They must be accepted and respected with compassion and sensitivity. And every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. I would even make that stronger and say should be outlawed. But anyway, I keep with the words there, should be avoided. But to treat somebody with respect and compassion and sensitivity, and not to discriminate against them, I think really calls us, and this is my own journey, I think, to understand where they're coming from, to listen to them, to read, to understand, to have friends, talk with them, etc. And you will see the depth and the beauty of these people. Something I never expected to find in my journey. So I'm sharing with you some of my own struggle with regard to coming to this position of where I am. And I just want to quote from Pope Francis. I haven't gone from for the newspaper headlines, etc., that we've heard recently, but I've gone to Amoris Laetitia, which is the joy of love. And it was Pope Francis's address to families, an encyclical, a letter to them. And he asked the church to meet people where they are, to consider the complexities of people's lives. And I think you will have seen something of the complexity with regard to the terms and the various terms and nuances, and is it gender, is it sexuality, is it this, is it that? So hugely complex. Now, I find this very interesting, to respect people's consciences when it comes to moral decisions. To respect people's consciences. So it's not you or I really can determine whether something is moral or immoral for somebody else. For ourselves, yes. But for somebody else, we have to make sure people are informed in their tradition, whether it's in Islam, whether it's as a Buddhist, whether it's as a Hindu, whether it's as a Christian, that they know their own tradition, and then that they are able to make decisions according to their conscience. The Pope goes on to say 3 key points, which I think we should look at. And the first one is same-sex marriage is not permitted. Well, neither is the ordination of women permitted. And neither is divorce and remarriage permitted. So there's a lot of things that are not permitted. So he's saying in the church, same-sex marriages are not permitted. But same-sex marriages are being recognized as civil unions in different parts of the world to ensure the rights of these people who enter into a covenant relationship with each other. Their right to share property, monies, etc., etc. And to enjoy the privileges that ordinary married people, heterosexual people would have, because they are in a covenant relationship. So this is some of the discrimination that we need to be aware of. Prohibition against unjust discrimination, we have said that. and in pastoral practice, accompany, the word he uses is accompany LGBTQ persons as we can, help them to form their consciences, the final arbitrator of moral decision making, and encourage them to lead faithful and holy lives. M-A-K-I-N-G is making, I have a D in there, we'll remove it before you get the final one. So, and this is from paragraph 250 of that encyclical letter. I'm not going to, I actually quoted all here, but I had taken out the points. You can read that for yourself. We won't labor it. So now we're more or less at our end, and we're going to take a moment to stop and reflect. Spelt wrong, excuse me again. What response did you give on the poll, are LGBTQ actions, behaviors moral or immoral? Just if you can remember back, what did you say? And has your answer changed? And we're going to launch another poll. And I have given you more options, I think, this time. So we'll launch the poll and select all that apply. Are LGBTQ actions and behaviors moral, immoral, a human rights issue, a mental health problem, a matter of conscience, or you're still not able to decide, you don't know? Again, thank you very much for engaging with the poll. We have 91, 93 of 107 responses, 94, 96, 98. Okay, we'll give it another few seconds. Moral, immoral, a human rights issue, mental health problems, a matter of conscience, don't know. And when we say don't know, it means you just don't have enough information at this moment, and it's part of maybe spurring you on to look and do more. A matter of conscience, 47%. A human rights issue, 54%. So very much the human rights and the conscience coming together there. 101 people have answered, marvelous. A moral issue is still evident, 25%, immoral 3%, and a mental health problem 9%. Those of you that think it's a mental health problem, I'll encourage you to read more and explore. I think all of the evidence from science says it's not a mental health problem. It has to do with hormones and chromosomes and orientation and how we're attracted to one another, etc. So I'd challenge people who think it's a mental health problem to review and do more study around that. Okay, we'll stop the poll. I think we're showing the results. Yes. Okay. So we'll just conclude 101 voted. Isn't that marvelous? A human rights issue, 54%, and then a matter of conscience, 47%, moral, 25%, immoral and mental health and don't know are less percentages. Okay. We're going to just bring all of this to a conclusion. I'm not, because we have spent maybe time, I'm not going to read word for word what's in these slides. I'm talking about ministry to children, prevalence of children who are either present as gender diverse or gender have, the prevalence of children who either present as gender diverse or identify as transgender is unknown. But some children do turn up in clinics having a certain disease with who they are and how they're experiencing themselves. And some studies would say between 5 and 12% of girls and 2 to 6% of boys exhibit cross-gender behaviors. And the question was asked why boys are lower than girls. And it's kind of felt that maybe girls get more freedom to explore themselves than do boys. And that the stereotype for boys is very much part of boys' upbringing, and therefore they might not be allowed the same latitude in experiencing and talking about these issues. There are 3 approaches that we can have in ministry to be affirming, gender affirming, to wait and see if the behaviors desist, or to actively discourage gender non-conforming behaviors. So these are the approaches, both in terms of people like ourselves, or if you're working with parents. And I think the tendency would be to be gender affirmative, meaning that you encourage the child to be who the child is. With regard to seeking therapies or seeking help or whatever, a wait and see, you know, but it's much better to talk about it. And to actively discourage, not the best way to go. And then like if children are experiencing themselves as children with attractions and behaving more as boys or as girls, this will continue into adolescence, and it can be a heightened period of anxiety, particularly if the adolescent is experiencing a lot of rejection or being ridiculed in school, etc. And this is why it's good to have laid a foundation with children in their earlier years to be able to talk about how they're experiencing themselves. You can read the rest of that there yourself. How can we build safe and inclusive environments in school and at home? That might be a question that we'd want to explore. And then these are just graphics that I came across in the Fair and Equal website. Intersex kids are perfect, just the way they are. Safe and inclusive. Now, I think these sometimes can challenge our mindsets. Every young life is precious. This was Ban Ki-moon. I worry for the LGBTQ adolescent and youth bullied at school, rejected by their families, living homeless on the streets. All should be protected from violence and discrimination, no matter who they are or whom they love. And then finally, recommendations. I've already maybe said some of them. Educate yourself. Avoid binary assumptions. Be inquisitive and empathetic. A person's gender pronouns cannot be assumed from their appearance. This is something more recently happening around, certainly here in the United States, about people's pronouns. So use pronouns other than she, her, or hers, or he, him, and his. These are binary. So if we use they, them, and theirs, it's more inclusive. Misgendering someone is disrespectful and dismissive. Make sure you and those around you have zero tolerance of any form of stigma or prejudice against LGBTQI people. But of course, we have to come to grips with this in ourselves first. Challenge and report any form of abuse or discrimination towards LGBTI people. Now, this might be difficult where it's against the law. So you have to think about this one, what's appropriate. I'm sure within the child protection guidelines that we have, we might want to be looking at some of these issues as well. Speak out and report all violence, including aggressive and threatening verbal abuse, even if it doesn't target you directly. And then be an ally. Be a friend of people who experience themselves as lesbian, gay, bisex, transgender, whatever their expression is. And then there are some resources there that you can look at, most of which I have already quoted. And if you're interested in buying a book, it's on Amazon in Kindle form, Building a Bridge. And it's James Martin's book. I just gave you the headline out of it, really, but you might want to read here in terms of understanding. With that, I come to an end, and I found this challenging. Why is it that as a culture, we're more comfortable seeing two men holding guns than holding hands? And again, as always, I thank you for staying the course in terms of listening for so long. And you can play the video yourself. We won't take any time on it. It's a 3-minute video. You have it, and you can, as I say, listen to it yourself. And on it is Desmond Tutu. So he would be another religious voice. And his main line is that he would not pray to a homophobic God. So I think that again would challenge us as to our image of God. So with all of that, I want to thank you sincerely for, as I say, staying the course.